Hi everybody, I wanted to give a brief video on how to use A-Frame's isolation mode. Now, what is isolation mode? It essentially allows you to flag a user to be isolated in viewing only the contacts they are an owner on or transactions where they are a participant of. And so this enables you essentially to isolate users to only see the information they should see. Now, typically we recommend you don't use this feature just because there is an element of trust that's typically involved in a team. However, if you really feel it necessary, this is a great option. Okay, first, before we get into how to set isolation mode, I want to briefly look at a contact and show you how the ownership and assignments work. So I'm looking at a contact here. This would be eventually a seller or a buyer, let's say. And when I add the contact, you always have the option to add ownership. And you can select as many owners as you like. We're going to go ahead and pick on Chris Johnson in this account. So I'm going to add him as an owner in this particular contact. So now Chris Johnson is an owner of this contact, and so is Burton Rhodes as well. So let me go ahead and click Save. I'll go back to the dashboard. So now looking at John and Jane Doe, Chris Johnson is an owner there. Additionally, let's go into Test Drive. And I'm going to go into the Participants tab, and this is where you can also select who is a part of the transaction. So here, for example, we have Chris Johnson as the primary agent and Burton Rhodes as the TC. So now we have this contact and a transaction where Chris Johnson is a participant. Each of these operates separately. So if, for example, Chris was not an owner of John and Jane Doe, he would be able to see the transaction. However, he wouldn't be able to click into John and Jane Doe and edit their record. So that's an important distinction, that when you enable isolation mode, you need to make sure ownership is correct on the main contact, the buyer or seller, and then also a participant in the transaction itself. So let's demonstrate how this works. I'm going to go into the admin area. Then I'm going to click user accounts. And now I can see all of my standard users. Now this feature does not apply to managed agents because they cannot log into the system. So let's go ahead and click on Chris Johnson's name and user profile. And this is where we're going to set the isolation mode under permissions. Now, this last entry is the isolation mode flag, so we'll go ahead and check that on. And then you may want to modify some of these other permissions. For example, you might not want this particular user to be able to delete any contacts or transactions. Maybe you don't want them to edit any templates in the admin area. Anyway, whatever permissions you feel like are appropriate, go ahead and make those selections. We're going to click Save, and now I'm going to mimic Chris Johnson's account just to kind of see how this works on the Chris Johnson side. So you'll see here Chris Johnson's dashboard, and you'll notice the test drive with John and Jane Doe. So I can click in here as Chris Johnson just fine. You'll see that the ownership is there. And I can also, as Chris, dive into any of the transactions that I am a part of. So if I go back to my dashboard just to demonstrate where things can cut people off, for example, for this particular transaction, Chris is a part of 1234 Main Street. So you'll see here that 1234 Main Street is here. It works just fine. And when I go to the Participants tab, he is selected as a primary agent. However, Chris Johnson is not an owner of John Doe. So you'll see what happens here when I click that. You'll see that you are not authorized to view this contact. So ownership becomes very important, as well as who's selected in the Participants tab when it comes to isolation mode. So just be very careful and cognizant of that when you do set somebody up in this particular mode. So hopefully this little feature will help many of you if you do have a team member where you'd like to isolate in some way. As always, if you have questions, please reach out to us at support@aframesoftware.com. Thanks.